And I'm grateful to them for letting me do this business on their land. And so when we talk about um, let's just talk about that land acknowledgement, because this is all about the land, what I'm talking about here. And the land acknowledgement, you might hear this in a school, or you might even hear the mayor of Vancouver say it. We would like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of, and then fill in the blank. And sometimes when you hear this, maybe even in a church, I encourage churches, please say this. And sometimes they feel like, oh, we're just doing it. It just feels like perfunctory. It feels like we're just doing it because we have to. And the guy is like, la, la, la. And then, that's done. So they feel bad about it. But I think even if you're going to do it, just, oh, we have a list of announcements, let's get through them. We now acknowledge, at least it's being said, at least it's being spoken. And, try to put some zest into your announcements. That'll make your church maybe better also. but but to me, as an Indigenous person, it's an important step in the journey of reconciliation. And by step, I don't mean your step or my step. We're adults. I mean like a baby's first step in the journey of reconciliation. That's what the land acknowledgement is. It is just the very, very beginning. And we're celebrating it, as I remember celebrating my baby's first steps. All three of my boys, and and it's wonderful. But that's kind of where we're at right now with the land acknowledgement. Do it; it's so important. Celebrate it, but we have a long way to go. We have a lot of relationship yet to work on. So go to that website, find out whose traditional territory you were born on, who, maybe you lived in a few different towns, find out those folks and where you're living now. It's important to me. Another reason why it's important to me to hear a land acknowledgement, no matter where I'm at, is because when I was in grade 6, let me just take a break. When I was in grade 6, and I'm 52 years old right now, I love telling people how old I am. Because I know my hair, I look like I'm 25, right? Just kidding. but I when I was in grade 6, I'm 52, and the teacher got up and said, well, and this, of course, that's the curriculum. He says, now we're going to study Indians in Canada. And there was me and another Native student in this neighborhood, in this school. Oh, there was more in the school, but just in this classroom. So I kind of looked over like, hey, that's us. That's kind of cool, right? and then immediately the teacher said, we'll be studying the Hurons in Eastern Canada. And I was like, what? Like, I'm in grade 6, right? I'm just a kid. And so I'm like, who are they? And what, And then immediately the teacher said, but we think they're probably extinct. And so I went from being like, yay, and then what? Oh no, in just seconds. And that was the story. This is the story that was told to us, to Canadians, to erase the memory of Indigenous people. It's part of the planned genocide, not only to eradicate Indigenous people by any means possible, but also to eradicate their story and to take away the story and to whitewash the history. So being a little kid and feeling like, hey, yeah, this is, maybe I'm kind of special, and, maybe they're going to talk about my people, because the traditional territory that I was on in grade 6 was part of the Daca Nation. It was a Clayton Tene First Nation, not my Natla-Wet'en, but it's close. But in those seconds that the teacher had, he was following the protocol of Canada. He was following the curriculum. He was colonizing our whole classroom. He was colonized himself. He believed those words, and he was perpetuating that story. So whenever I hear the land acknowledgement now, I feel like And like I said, I've heard it done where it's just perfunctory, but I still feel it. I still feel good when I hear it. And I still feel grateful that it's being said. I feel grateful that the land is being acknowledged that we're on. And it makes me feel like I'm not invisible anymore. It makes me feel like I'm a human being. And that is why it is so important to me. And like I said, don't like I want you to get excited and celebrate, but remember this is your first baby step in this journey. Um yeah. There's something else I was going to mention about that. Oh, the Hurons. That's right. This lovely teacher said that the Hurons were probably extinct, which was horrifying and shocking. But I've since met a few, and they have. If you ever get to go to Wendake, they have one of the most beautiful hotels I have ever seen in my life, and it's right there on the res. It's just gorgeous. So yeah, and I was on the radio there, and they have the radio. They speak in Innu, and then they translate it into French, and then we had to have them translate for us into English, and that was a great experience. But I told that story there, and we all felt that story because that is all of our story, and we all kind of were like, you're either gonna laugh or you're gonna die from all the horrible things. So we tried. And an elder once said to me that we grieve in two ways: we cry and we laugh. And so that's why I think a lot of Native people are so lighthearted and have such an ability to laugh and such a great sense of humor. So keep doing that. Keep finding out. Keep talking about Native land, because the less that we're objectified and rendered storyless, the more that we will all become decolonized, and that we can all really live in true relationship together. So the Bible has a lot to say about land. The Old Testament especially, it's just all about the land. Like it's super important to them, and it's super important to God as well. God talks in terms of nations of people, but they're always connected to land. So in Acts, there's a scripture, Acts 19, I believe, 26 or 17:26, where it says that God chose the exact places where people would live. And I love that scripture because that goes along with our philosophy. Indigenous philosophy of land and creator is that the creator placed us on our land. And so that's an important difference. There's no stories that I have found in all my travels of a long walk over a land bridge. There's no stories like that. There's always a story of placement. The only people who have a story that I know of in North America that have a long walk are the Navajo and the Apache, or the Dene and the Apache. And interestingly, my language, Dakel, we also have the word Dene. We say Yinka Dene, which means people of the land. And there's people of Northern Canada. You guys know this as soon as I said it, you were like, oh, there's people in Northern Alberta called the Dene, and up into the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, lots of like territory, beautiful people, but they're part of the Athabascan linguistic group. So are the Dene and the Apache. They have the same linguistic group. My elders can talk to their elders if they're fluent, because they can understand the language, each other's language. And then they have a story of a long walk, and so I always tease them and say, "Why'd you gotta go and walk away from us? What's the deal?" So, but they were snowbirds. I don't know. We don't know. But I remember talking to one elder, and I only know a few words in my language, because the residential schools and colonization did a number on my family. And my grandpa wanted us to succeed in the white world, so he didn't speak carrier to us or Dakel to us. But I do know a few words. My mom knew a lot more. She always said she didn't know much, but she knew quite a few words. And she passed last year. But I remember talking to this Dene elder, this Navajo elder, and we were comparing some words. And I said, "Sus" in my language means bear, and he said, "Oh, in my language it's shush. Shush means bear, and also means shut up." And then we both laughed and we laughed and we laughed. He looked, his eyes got big as soon as he said it to me. So, and so sus and shush, you can hear the similarities. And then for our word for small or little is yaz, and their word is yash. Our word for big is cho, and their word is tso. So it's really, really close. It's a lot of fun. And linguistics are actually probably a better way to gauge how long our people have been on the land. Because archaeologically, of course, there's maybe not as much evidence as we would like. And that's because I think we were like incredibly good stewards of the land. And just everything was sustainable and everything went back to the land. But if you study linguistics, you can tell that how old a language is. For example, English. English is a fairly new language, matter of hundreds of years old. And there's elements in English of where it came from. You have a lot of German words in English. You have a lot of Latin words, and so you can see how the language was formed, and you can actually see in history when it was formed. And it's the same in with linguistic studies in North America. The studies that I have read say that they're very, very, very old languages, and they're unique as well. There are some languages like the Zuni language, the people in Arizona, I think it's Arizona, maybe it's New Mexico, and their language doesn't have any relation to any other language in the world, which it's a very exceptional to have that when that happens. So yeah, those are some just little key something you can unlock and then have a bit of research yourself. The Great Philosophy, this was interesting to me because I was raised in kind of a conservative Christian Pentecostal circle, and it was independent as well. So the theology was interesting to me, and the theology when I was younger was always that evil is like just a sort of like always there, and even the land could be evil, especially native land was evil. But there was always this idea that, and of course, we understand that there is evil present in this world. But to say native land is evil is a perspective. It's not the truth. I remember there were some missionaries who came to my village in Atley, and my mom and I had traveled from Prince George, and we were sitting in my grandpa's house, and the missionaries came in, and there was a hill that they had to drive down, just a little hill that they drove down. And if you're driving into Natley, you'll see the Natley River, and there's a bridge. And on the right-hand side is a little blue house. That's my Auntie Irene's house. But it was my grandpa's house. So we were sitting in there. I was about 15 or so years old, and 14, I don't know. And these missionaries said, when we drove down this hill, we could feel the oppression rising. And I kind of like, what? And I was like, that's so scary. They could feel the evil. And then I looked over at my grandpa, and he was just stoic. And he was a beautiful, beautiful kind of like chiseled faced Indigenous man. And I don't know if he didn't hear it or if he just didn't react to it, but he didn't say anything. And I felt it. I felt like, whoa, like I love this place. Like I love this land. And when my mom married my dad, a non-native, she moved to Prince George, but she had what I believe now to be culture shock, like severe culture shock. And so we were always going back to Natley all the time. And then she would relax when she went to Natley. So now that's my reaction. When I go to Natley, I just am like, home free, like I'm safe, I made it. And having my mom feel that, but then the story was kind of placed on top of that. And not everything in the res is perfect. And, it's not a Pocahontas story like that, singing to birds and stuff. I mean, Jonathan does that once in a while, but it's not a normal thing for us to do. It's, we are so connected to the land. But um, anyway, now back to those missionaries. There's another missionary, one of my profs at Regent named Charles Ringma, and he told the story of going to an Indigenous area. They don't call them. I'll just call it community. And he was young. It was I think his first missionary trip, and so I'm sitting in Regent, and I'm like, okay, where's this guy going? And I thought about how the missionaries talked when I was younger. And that's how everybody talked in my church circles back in the day. The native land, native stuff, native earrings, everything was evil. So, Professor Charles Ringma said that when he spent the first night in this community, in this Indigenous community in Australia, and he felt like the ceiling was coming down on him, and he felt like this really great fear rising up in him. And so I was all prepared, in studying in my master's, and I was all prepared for him to talk the same talk, but he didn't. He said, this probably had something to do with this being my first experience in a different culture. And so there was a lot of culture shock. And he said, and also, if this was my first missions trip, anytime you do step out to do anything for God, why wouldn't you expect the enemy to push back and to try to get you out of there or try to stop you from, doing ministry, good work? So those things made sense. And he said, there's nothing more evil or more dark or whatever in an Indigenous community. And that made me feel so good. I just kind of relaxed back into my seat, like, oh, thank God. Because my experience in Natlé with painful things, terrible things that happened there, like grief and shame and lots of things, right? But so much good also, and so much love and such connection to that land, like that is. And I've always wondered, what is that, just that pull that I'm just constantly pulled back to Natlé. And that love that we have for the land. Well, the Greek philosophy which is in the New Testament as well, it talks about how the land is, or flesh. There's the idea of flesh and spirit, and this is interesting because those things can never meet. Like the area of flesh is like the earth and us and all of that stuff, and it's all evil. Everything that's flesh is evil, but the things that are of spirit, well, that's God and it's pure. But those things cannot touch, or else the evil will taint the pure. And so heaven, that's why you have this idea that the heavens are way the heck up there and that the earth is down here. That's where you get those ideas from. This is Greek philosophy. And I've often wondered where heaven is up there, because it can't be too far, because then that's space, and that would be weird. So it's maybe in the atmosphere, like, I don't know. But that's not ancient Hebrew philosophy, which is interesting to me. That idea of the land and the spirit world is much more close like this. Like they are intertwined, and there are different dimensions, but they're very, very close. And that is also Indigenous philosophy of the spirit world and of the land, that they're very close. And so that, to me, I love the going back into ancient Hebrew philosophy. And that's, so one of the things that we get when you go too far with the Greek philosophy, you end up with something called Gnosticism. And Gnosticism is this idea, well, I'll talk about this idea that the spirit is the holy thing. So when Jesus was born as a man, and God, the creator of the universe, was born as a man, how they wrapped their minds around this, because they had the idea that the flesh was evil, so God could not really have become flesh. It couldn't have happened. That's what they would, one of these heresies, they would teach that Jesus could not have become flesh because that was evil. and that was connected to the land. So they said Jesus probably didn't leave footprints, and he was all spirit. And that, we say, is a heresy, because God, we believe that in order for God to redeem man, God had to become flesh. And the idea of the incarnation, the idea that the Creator became one of us, had skin on. And I like the way Eugene Peterson put it, that the Word of God became flesh and blood. And he says, moved into the neighborhood. And I like to say, moved onto the res. So there's some of the idea where we get that, this land, I think, where some of that comes from, why the land could be evil. And also, that's part of colonization. It's part of the story of colonization to call people evil, or to call their ways evil. It really is. And there are, of course, you go into cultures and there's some things that are, you just can't, you cannot, you don't want to let that stuff continue. There's, and I don't even want to talk about some of the things, but the problem is when non-indigenous people come into our communities and they say all of it is bad, everything is bad, just get rid of, when in doubt, throw it out. And to me, that's not okay. That's not up to anybody but us to decide what is morally wrong, what is spiritually wrong, what is, and okay, maybe not morally wrong, but anyway. But that is not for anybody to judge. That's for somebody to walk alongside of us in humility and to talk about some of those things. But the day is over. The day is long gone of the, what do they used to call that? The old white guys sitting around making rules for Indians on the res, right? All of that, the ones that wrote the Indian Act, and those days are gone. We are so leaning into healing, and we have a right to be able to speak and to talk about the things that our spirituality, our ways, and to be able to talk about those things, and not just be told what to do. Got a bit of a chip on my shoulder about that, don't I? But I have been fighting these things since I was a kid. People assuming things about Christians, assuming things about me or judging me based on the fact that I'm Indigenous, and so that's not okay. So back to the Hebrew philosophy of the land. I loved when I heard that. I loved that connection to land, and that the spirit world was very close, because that's how Indigenous people feel as well. And in my travels, in my studies, in listening to elders, in being a part of the Natlewoten community, I have found that we as Indigenous people, we love, just like lots of people in other cultures, we love the land. We love sitting by. Who doesn't love sitting beside a creek and listening to the creek? Who doesn't, love hearing the wind in the trees? Those things are soothing. Those things are beautiful, and so we're the same as anybody who loves that stuff. But the difference is that when you're placed on the land, and when that land, in my story, the Creator placed us on a land and gave us a responsibility to watch over the land. And in the story told to me by the late the former chief of Sycas, he told the story that everything that I told you, but he also said, in one day, Creator is going to come back and see how we have cared for the land. And so there was an element of judgment, and it was based on land stewardship, which is also interesting to me. That's in our stories. And when I say stories, I don't mean legend, I don't mean myth, I mean our histories. The oral tradition of our people is history. And if you don't like oral tradition, you don't trust Indigenous oral tradition, then you better have a good hard look at the Bible, because the entire Bible is based on oral tradition. It is words that are carried over and then were eventually written down a couple quite a bit later. So Indigenous oral history is important to listen to. So yeah, and especially that it always is daunting to me that people, anthropologists like to talk about that land bridge when it's in like none of our stories. None of our stories talk about that, and and it just feels to me like why won't people listen and just hear us rather than oh, thank you for your cute little myth or your cute little legend story, but here's how you actually got to be. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's very, and again, it's part of the process of colonization. It's part of all of that. That is a good example of systemic racism, how racism is so built into the structure of Canada that we don't even call it racism anymore. We just call it, yeah, these guys, these anthropologists are just doing their thing and they're right. And every Indigenous community in Canada and the United States is wrong. And nobody has the sort of sense to go, huh, hang on a second. Maybe that's systemic racism. Maybe we need to deconstruct that. Maybe we need to decolonize those stories. So when it comes to the Indigenous view of the land and talking about, my time is running out here, but we have been often called animists or pantheists or monists, and that is the kind of idea that animism is where, I don't know if they use that word in theological circles anymore, I don't think so, but it's sort of like everything has a spirit, like a rock has a spirit and a tree has a spirit. And there's also pan means all, so everything, and monism is the same kind of idea that everything is God, and it's all one kind of an idea. And that's kind of like some Eastern mysticism or Eastern spirituality wrapped up in there as well. But for Indigenous people, in my travels and in asking questions of elders, I have found very few communities and people who talk like that. I don't hear a whole lot of that stuff when it comes to that. That it's all, or what is the word? I guess it's pantheistic, so that everything is God, and that the tree is God, and that we are God, and all of those. That's a pantheistic idea. That's what we're labeled as, or animists, but we're actually not. We are the closest kind of spirituality that I can say that our people have been is ancient Hebrew, where there's a very strong belief in the Creator. And every single community I've gone to, there is a name in our language and a story of the Creator. And even when missionaries have told me, no, there's no, they've actually said that about the Zuni people. Some missionaries have been there on the land for 60 something years. And they said they just have all these, false gods. And so we went in and I asked an elder who wasn't a Christian. She was taking us on a tour of something. And I said, do you have a name or a story for the Creator? And she said, of course we do. And she told me the name in her language. And she said, and I remember it too, I try not to say them because I believe also they're holy names. Then she said, in the translation in English is the one who started everything. And she said, we start every one of our ceremonies, every morning we start with prayer to the one who started everything. And I thought that was so beautiful. And in every community I've gone to, of the hundreds of First Nations communities, and I haven't talked to hundreds of elders, but I asked as many as I could, what's the name of Creator? And I got so many, and there's always a beautiful name. My favorite, one of my favorites is Wakan Takan, which means the great mystery. And I love that because I just think there is so much mystery. And after doing years and years of theological work, I love being able to sort of Gregory of Nyssa, stand on the precipice and consider God as a great mystery as well. And the other name that has actually saved my life and saved my Christianity is the name also in Lakota, which is Takanshala, and that's grandfather. And that's the idea. This beautiful name for God, this grandfather name for God, is what has walked me through, I think, a lot of stuff. And during the TRCs, I had a real crisis of faith because I traveled to a lot of the TRCs and I sang at some of them and listened to hundreds of stories of elders. And I remember just beginning to kind of just shake after hearing so many stories. And I just it was so traumatic, and it was so hard. I knew the stories from, where I'm from, like Jack. I knew some of the stories, and some of the, that they tore it down right after it got given back to our people. But I had a crisis of faith where the thing that saved my faith in God was that our Indigenous people have ancient stories of the Creator that predate the story that was brought over from Europe. And that gospel that they brought over was never given as a gift. But the gospel that they brought was always used as a tool or a weapon of assimilation and eradication. And they used the gospel to try to genocide us. So going back to these stories of the Creator, which connects us again so closely to creation, that I would call us monotheistic. We are like the ancient Hebrews. We believe in one God. We believe in, and the way that I see God revealed is through Jesus, grandfather, this ancient one. In Daniel 9 talks about God as the ancient one, and so grandfather is sort of akin to that. It's a beautiful term, and when if you have a good grandfather and a good grandmother in your life, then immediately you feel this connection to God in a new way. That God could be playful, could be funny and fun and loving and disciplines you in unique ways that you don't even realize it. Tells you stories. That's Takanshala, and that's the one that yeah. So that was all an aside, that Creator stuff. But that the stories, you have to think about these things, how they mislabeled us animistic and pantheistic. Like, that's not okay to just like put those labels on people because of an assumption. It takes a lot more of learning and listening to figure out exactly what's going on, rather than jumping to conclusions. And I think that people have been jumping to conclusions about Indigenous people for hundreds of years, about our spirituality, about our beliefs, rather than walking alongside of us. So today we have an opportunity. When we talk about the land, when we talk about tough stuff like Mi'kmaq and what's going on over there, and how do we even think about that? You can put on the colonist, eyeglasses and say, we're all, this and this is not right and whatever. And those white fishermen have every right to ram the boats of all those native people. Or you can, take off those colonist glasses, rose-colored glasses, or maybe not rose-colored glasses, and you can put on the lens of treaty and just say, there's an ancient treaty called the Peace and Friendship Treaty, and it was from the 1700s. Jonathan, you guys on the East Coast can probably speak to it much better than I can. But they're breaking a treaty that's called Peace and Friendship Treaty. Like, how devastating is that? And this has to do with land and land rights and fishing rights, and it's important stuff. It's massively important. For Indigenous people to have that connection, that stewardship, that responsibility over the land, and those things are also being taken away. So this conversation is a baby step. This is just day one, kindergarten maybe, of learning a whole lot about what it means to walk alongside Indigenous people, to think about these things. And I'll close with, really over time, but I'll close with this thought that I when I drive back into Natley, I used to feel that great sense of relief. And I always wondered, why do I feel so good when I come back here? Is it because I know all the different houses and I know who lives there and I know how they're related to me, and I've known that these people since I was little. They knew my mom, they knew my grandpa, all of this stuff. Is it just because I know that? And then I realized, oh my goodness, our stories say that we have been on the land time immemorial. That means it's gone out of memory how long we've been on the land. And so if you think about that, then in a very scientific sense, the land is literally made of my ancestors. We have been on that land that long. We always go home to be buried. So that connection is really deep. And then it kind of made me think in kind of I don't know what kind of way, but I felt like the land itself in some ways welcomes me and is happy that I'm home. And that not only I am sighing and relaxing, but the land is like, you're back. And that's how deep this connection goes for Indigenous people, for me, for sure, and not like. And so thank you for listening to me. Thank you for letting me share my stories and for listening to important voices all this week. I will be listening along as well. I will be one of the participants in as many sessions as I possibly can. But thank you. Thank you for listening. I lift my hands to you for being on this journey of reconciliation with all of us. Snachalia, Masicho, thank you very much in my language.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that. We're going to open for a couple questions. You can post down in the question and answer box there. We'll try to get as many as we can.
Oh, I got a question here. Oh, I'm not muted. Good. Dr. Bear, can you say again which people call the Creator grandfather? I would love to learn more about this. That was Lakota Sioux. I learned that word from Jonathan and my dear friend, the late Dr. Richard Twist. Takanshala. To William Gauthier, the name of the land that I live in is right now is Vancouver, BC, but I was living up until a couple of months ago in Natlewatan on my First Nations community. I'm on the land, the Coast Salish land. Kim, I've heard the reference Turtle Island. What does this refer to? I think Jonathan could answer that question better.
There we go. Am I there now?
Yes, you are.
So what was the question?
I heard the reference Turtle Island. What does this refer to? Oh,
Turtle Island represents North America. It represents kind of the turtle. The old legend was that the turtle rose up out of the water, and our people were a part of this land. So we all refer to this as Turtle Island. I noticed there's another question down there from Lisa. How can I, as a Christian, help Indigenous people? And I think that for starters, you're already in the right place, because I think the things that you're going to hear over this session for the next 4 weeks past this one are going to be some pretty amazing words like Cheryl has given today. I mean, as you were speaking, Cheryl, there was a really cool story that came to mind about the land. When I was in one of my travels, I was flying into the Arctic. I was flying to the northernmost outpost in North America. And as I'm flying in there, I'm in this little plane, and it was cold in the plane, and I was sitting there, and behind me to the right, there was a mom and 2 little girls with her. And they're flying, and I think we were flying to Barrow, Alaska. And I was listening to them because they were kind of giggling and everything. And the mom looked at the girls and she said, "We're going home. We're going home." And they were all just about crying. They were so excited to go home. Now, I got to tell you, for me, going into Barrow, Alaska, I mean, this is cold and it's barren, and there's polar bears that walk down the streets sometimes. I mean, it doesn't sound like a place you'd want to go to necessarily unless you had a real spirit of adventure. But this mom and her two daughters were so excited to go to this place that other people would consider a hardship to go to. But our native people often will say about our northern communities, well, why don't all those communities just pack up and move down here closer to the border where it's warmer and where there's economy and everything like that? But, they love their home. They hunt, they fish, they're a part of that land. And just like you said, Cheryl, they go home. They go home. When they die, they go home. They want to be at home. That's the place, And I've just seen that so much, that representation of their love, our people's love for the land. I love Tyendinaga. When I'm flying home, I've been away for 25 years. And every time I'm coming home, my heart is just leaping with joy to get home. There's a good question there, Cheryl. If the land acknowledgement is first baby step in the local church, what would you recommend as the next step for us?
Yay, thanks for asking that question. Oh, and this also goes to the question about help. I wouldn't actually. I think the reason that we called this conference "Walking Together" is because that's a better way to say, instead of saying "How can I help Indigenous people?" maybe let's ask, "How can I walk together? How can I walk better together?" And Marie Aldred always said, "Walking on the land in a good way together." And I think that's better than help, because in a lot of ways, I think Canada probably needs our help more than we need theirs. There's so much beauty and wealth in Indigenous history, story, all of that Canadians need to learn and need a lot of healing from and by Indigenous people. So that may be let's flip those terms over. But I agree with Jonathan. This kind of a event where it's, you have these guys, Jim, and all of these different churches. We've been planning this thing for over a year. We've had tons, way more Zoom than you ever should have. I'm just kidding. To discuss, to lay out, they did everything so thoughtfully. Walter McIntyre was involved in this. I'm not even remembering all the names, but there were so many people who thought about every detail. And so this kind of a forum where you're learning this kind of stuff, it's brilliant. But I think another giant step for churches would be to take one of the free courses, and you can take it for audit, or you can take it for credit, like from University of Alberta, Calgary, or Edmonton. I think the University of Regina has free courses in Indigenous studies. And there you're going to learn. You're going to learn so much. I can't say enough how important that would be to me for every Canadian to take those courses.
One of the things that I always say to churches is, who are your local First Nations people? I was going to a church that was just maybe 100 miles north of where I live. Like up near Barry's Bay or something. And when I went up there, I said to the pastor, I said, so I want to give you some homework, and I want you to find out what First Nations communities are nearby. And right off the bat, without even anything, they just said, oh, there's no First Nations communities within an hour of here. And I come up there and come to find out people knew I was coming, and local Native people were coming from local Native communities in the area that they didn't even know existed. So the challenge that I think as well to go to the next step would be find out who your local First Nations people are and begin to build an honest relationship with them. And how do you do that? There's a whole bunch of good ways, but the main way that I like to do it is through food. You know, us guys, we like food a lot, and so you have meals, you have potlucks, you have gatherings where you come together and you get to know one another, and I guess one of the other things that First Nations people have always been felt held back by is the fact that when they do come into a church or whatever, it's always them listening and everybody else talking. And with First Nations people are not going to jump in and take over a conversation. That's just not the way First Nations people are. So if you want to hear what they have to say, you have to give them the opportunity to speak. And I find that the churches that have moved forward are the churches that have allowed their First Nations people to play an active role, because First Nations people need to be partners, not subjects. Partners of the church. Yeah,
So important. Yeah,
that's awesome, the stuff you were saying. It just spurred all these thoughts, Cheryl. Very good.
thank you, bro. That's all. And I love on the Q&A, there's tons of people. I see Das Sydney from the territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee. I love seeing that when you guys are, and there's lots on there. So thank you for doing that. And I like to give people homework as well. Whose land are you on? Some good comments. Thank you for the insight that the gospel was never given as a gift. Crystallized one of the key problems in a way that I don't think I could have done myself. You're welcome. Just kidding. I'm gonna be a little bit cheeky. We've thought about these things for so long. We've talked, Jonathan and I and Sarah and others, Indigenous folks like us, we've talked about these things for like 25, 30 years and lived it for longer. You know, what was it? Richard Twist used to say, I've been an Indian all my life. I was an Indian when it wasn't cool, you know, before Dances with Wolves. And so a lot of these things we've had to think about, we've had to wrestle with, and we've been confronted with so much racism, not only from Canada and the US, but from the church, spiritual abuse and racism towards us. So we've had to think about these things a long, long time. So thank you for that acknowledgement. I appreciate it. Okay, I'll turn it back over to you guys. There's a lot of writing here.
There's one good one there, Cheryl, that maybe you have some insight on. The question from Charlene. I've sometimes heard Indigenous elders talk about receiving messages from various animal spirits. This makes me somewhat uncomfortable, but I'm wondering whether that's more a result of my colonized view of spirituality. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Oh, this is awesome. Thanks for asking that. You're putting yourself in a very vulnerable place to ask these questions. And so thank you for that humility, Charlene. I love hearing the stories when my elders talk about getting a message or seeing a sign. And a lot of times it's a sign, you know, you'll see an eagle and everybody loves eagles, but for Indigenous people, it's like, whoa, that's the sign. Like that is the sign that God is with me, or that, you know, a sign of comfort. For me, the sign that whenever I need an answer, whenever it seems like I'm like, it's my sign is the Big Dipper, which is also the only constellation I can recognize. So that's anyway, but that's a whole other thing. But the talking to animals, Balaam's ass talked as well, and the interesting thing in that story in the Old Testament, when a donkey starts talking to Balaam, the first thing out of Balaam's mouth isn't like, what the heck, there's a talking donkey. He just actually starts having a conversation with it, right? Like there's never any like, he should have ran away. Like that would have been, if you never heard, you know. So in my mind, ancient peoples, Indigenous peoples, it's not something that's again part of that great mystery. And I really feel like a lot of times, like Creator, like God will give us signs like that. And sometimes, like Balaam, you know, you need a bit of a kick.
I think that in that also there's a part of where we're not necessarily to be the judge, but we're supposed to love. And sometimes we get ourselves so freaked out by the situation that we aren't able to walk in the love that we're supposed to be carrying. Because if Christ is really powerful in us, then when that situation comes up, rather than judge, we love. And then that brings a potential for our eyes to be opened, and our eyes to be able to, and our hearts to be able to see. And maybe God will explain it in a beautiful spiritual way to us. Because sometimes we walk into situations like I went to one of the very first times I went to a pipe ceremony. I was like really nervous because I thought I shouldn't be going to a pipe ceremony. I'm a Christian, and that was the stigma that was put on me and made me feel I shouldn't go. But when I opened the door to go to that pipe ceremony with this medicine man down in Escazone, the door opened for us to have one of the most challenging and wonderful conversations that took both of us to new levels in the spirit, in God's spirit. And so, before you judge, love, and let God open your ears and your heart to be able to have a better understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a couple of questions I can answer pretty quick. Can you give an example of Indigenous ceremonies or traditions that reveal an Indigenous monotheistic view of God? So the Zuni, like I said, they start every ceremony with prayer to the one who started everything. And I think that's pretty much every one of us will start every meeting. I get asked on a regular basis to open up political meetings with our chief and council and other mayors, MPs, premiers. We get asked to open in prayer at those things, and it's always prayer to the Creator. And that's the monotheistic view is everywhere. Priska is asking, how do Indigenous peoples deal with interterritorial marriages when at least one party is away from the homeland? Yeah, that's an interesting question. And it's also you guys will have heard of the Trail of Tears that the Cherokees went on, the forced walk. And this was, I don't even know, I forgot what year it was, but I talked to some Cherokees and now they're in Oklahoma, whereas they used to be on the East Coast, right? But I asked one of them, I said, isn't it hard to not be on your traditional territory? Like, do you ever have, are you ever mad about that? And one of the guys said, well, this is home now. So, and that's maybe the same thing with territorial marriages. That's one of the reasons why people move away, sometimes for a job. But I know that there are some elders who left residential school and then moved away from the land because the pain of what happened in residential school was too tough. And so that's another reason why Indigenous people often or sometimes leave the land. So, but usually it's always, you're always tied. You always go back. Oh, I love the Ghanaian Grace. Oh, beautiful words. I'm Ghanaian from Africa, and the terms animist, polytheist, ancestral worshiper, spiritist have been used by missionaries to refer to our traditional religion, which was mostly the worship of the Supreme Being. Whenever people lack understanding of something, they use their own labels for it. My prayer is that many will learn from this webinar, and together we will make the world a beautiful place to live. Thank you, Grace from Bilberry Baptist. Beautiful.
Thank you, Grace. Share some more info on the courses they were asking, Cheryl.
Oh yeah, those Calgary, Edmonton, just go on websites, or you could just Google free Indigenous Studies courses in Canada, and I'm sure a few will pop up.
Cheryl, there's a good question here from Alan. How have you reconciled your own Christian faith with the Christian faith used as a tool for colonization through Canadian history? It's an important question.
Well, it's a very good question. Yeah, I think, and like I said, if I hadn't heard the stories of all of the different stories of Creator from so many different elders across the land, Canada and the United States, I'm not sure I would still be a Christian because of the story of the TRC, the history of colonization of our people, and specifically using the gospel as a weapon. It's so hurtful. And when you talk about when we say things like, the doctrine of discovery, and you guys can Google that, and maybe subsequent speakers will talk about it as well. But when you talk about that, where monarchs in Europe said to the explorers, when you go out and you find land, and if there's no recognized monarch, then consider the land empty. And so then they had debates as to whether or not Indigenous people had a soul or not. And those debates, the result of those debates were really serious. If we did have a soul, then they had to send missionaries. If we didn't have a soul, they could just exterminate us. So those were the debates in the 1500s. So reconciling the faiths, sometimes I just have to say, some of the things that we were taught was garbage. They were lies. They were flat out lies, and they weren't even told in a good way. They tell, and this is another example that I use to exemplify what I just said, because it sounds very strong to have Christians just lie or to tell a story in a skewed way to keep Indigenous people oppressed. The example I'll give is the slave Bible. Slave owners, way back in the day in the U.S., they had a slave Bible. It was much smaller than yours or mine because they took out all of the scriptures that had to do with freeing slaves, or like the whole book of Exodus pretty much had to come out, because that's all about. Now, can you imagine there being like a slave Bible? Could you imagine being given that Bible and all of the verses of freedom are gone? And why would they do that? Well, because freedom is dangerous, and so is justice. So when we're talking about some of these issues, and we're talking about reading the Bible and reading it in an Indigenous way, or interpreting the Bible in an Indigenous way, that seems to some people like it's wrong or it's even heresy. But for us, it's justice. And again, freedom is dangerous, justice is dangerous. Yeah, so that's been a journey, though.
Yeah.
Johnny.
How have you recognized your own Christian faith, reconciled your own Christian faith with the Christian faith you used as a tool? I think it's an interesting thing, but it's like Cheryl is talking about, when we take the time and we get to know someone, some of the things that are revealed to us are far different than we put the stigma on when we first saw the person. I can remember my father saying that when he met Jesus, he didn't give up being a Mohawk, he became a better Mohawk. And because he had this newfound faith, and this faith wasn't in a white man's God, but it was in the truth of the Spirit of God, the peace that passes understanding, the goodness that comes. When you meet Jesus, it just brings a whole new way of thinking into your spirit. And so there was people who used it, as Cheryl said, used it as weaponry against our people. But those people, I don't believe, were true representatives of Christian faith. So when we took the time to go deeper and discover what Christian faith really was, we saw the value in it.
Jeanette Mack says, Cheryl, can you speak a bit to the process of discernment that Indigenous Christians go through to know when a traditional ceremony or practice can be used for worship? That's a good question. I think probably the questions, they're getting a little bit into more of the practical sort of, what do they call that? What do they used to call us, Johnny? They called us syncretists.
Oh my.
Jonathan's, all of his paraphernalia that you see behind him, that was all called, Johnny's a syncretist, and he's mixing Christianity with pagan religion and stuff like that. And so we've been called it all. And so when I see questions like that, I know that's not your heart, Jeanette. God, God help us. Forgive me if that's what I'm sounding like. That's not what I mean. But when I see questions like that, that's what it kind of reminds me of. And it kind of feels like it's not a question that Christians should be asking of Indigenous people. If you're in a a friendship, a really good friendship with Indigenous people, then you could maybe go through that process of. But I don't. I think it's up to the people who know that ceremony, because there's lots of ceremonies all over the place that I have no idea what they are. And I answered here another question about the smudge. I love the smudge ceremony because to me, it's the idea is cleansing, and all of our ceremonies are about cleansing. And the Old Testament is filled with cleansing ceremonies, like in the New Testament as well. Even the Apostle Paul, who was, when the Judaizers said he was becoming, he was hanging out with the Gentiles too much. So what did he do? He goes to the temple, and I think there was a process of like shaving your head and putting ash on yourself or something like that. But he had to go and do all of those ceremonies to prove that he was still a Jew. So that's to me, there's ceremony all over the Bible. And so when we do ceremony and we have smoke, it like freaks people out. But it's there's the idea behind it is always cleansing, and the idea behind the ceremonies is usually to approach the Creator, and that's very biblical.
Someone is asking a question about Kathy here from Iderton, Ontario. My question is, what is a totem pole? Is it a signpost or a religious symbol?
Yeah, good question. The totem poles are typically found on the west coast of BC, the ones that are usually copied anyway. Other places might have similar poles, but or totems, but the west coast ones that we have, they're a story. There's no religious significance whatsoever to them. So it's a story of a great chief, or it's a story of a family or something. And all the animals that you'll see on totem poles, that's the West Coast thing as well. And it's uniquely like Alaska, BC, and Washington. That's with the animals on it. And those are clans. Those are, you heard Sarah saying she's from the Wolf Clan, and I'm from the Bear Clan. And so if I see, a bear, I wonder, is there a connection? There's lots of different bear clans, and but that's the idea.
I see a really interesting question. Go ahead, Sarah. Did you have one? Okay.
Sorry.
So
go ahead.
There's one here from Carl Moore, Professor Carl Moore. I'm a Finnish background, mother from Northern Ontario and Irish father from Saskatchewan, but I live in Montreal. How can I connect with the land in a way that you do?
That's a good question. I would say that the best way is to just get to know the Indigenous people that are closest to you. I think that when, like, if you lived down the road from Jonathan and you got to meet him at the coffee shop or the restaurant that his daughter runs, or if you ran into, he'd probably be just as interested in you as you are in him. And when a friendship evolves, then you can ask some more questions, but I think that's the sort of the best way. I think though those Indigenous studies also are helpful. There's a lot of Indigenous writers. I'm just reading a book called Embers by Richard Wagamese, and it's just beautiful. There's just devotions in there. There's talk about the land. There's the writing I just read today. He said he went for a walk and the mountain spoke to him, and I just loved it, and just so beautiful, right? So something like that, where it's some of those words might kind of like make you go, what's going on here? But I just encourage you, don't be afraid of the great mystery. I just think that God is so much bigger than us. And some of the questions, I lost the question here. No, I can't.
I think I just want to just speak to that other one just for a second. You hit it right on when you said, get to know Johnny down the street at the coffee shop or something like that. But I think find out, like when Jim opened up with the land acknowledgement, who is the people of the area, right? And so if you find out who the people of the area, we know Mohawks all are at Montreal and Ganawage and that area. But I mean, I know that Finnish people are people of the land because I've been up in the north and I've been in Finnish communities and I've slept in Finnish homes, and I know that they are truly people of the land as well. And they've adopted Northern Ontario, the capital, the Finnish capital of the world outside of Finland is Thunder Bay, from what I could see anyway. But I'm just saying, if you're in Montreal, find out who the local Native people are and let them welcome you to the land. Be welcomed by the local people to the land. You know, it may not be easy. You may have to go through some protocols, and you know, a gift opens doors. You want to open door to a Native person or a Native community, you know, go bearing gifts. It's a really wonderful way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, there was another good question here. Oh, Bill Needham. I'm from the land of the Blackfoot. Nitsitapi, yay! How encouraged or discouraged are you with regards to the next generation and the continuation? I am very encouraged. I have kids coming to me who are learning to be teachers, and they have stories like they can't even believe some of the history, and they talk to me. They don't come to me and they don't ask me questions like, so what's up with Native people? Like, why do you guys always want your land back? And why do you always get everything for free? You know, they don't have any of those old questions that I used to get when I was a kid and a teenager. And it was so frustrating because it's like, we don't get everything for free. We pay so many taxes, just like everybody else, you know, and there are answers to all those questions. We don't have time for that here. But now the kids are asking, or they're telling me, they're like, we can't believe what happened in the residential schools. That is so wrong. And these are, you know, the 20-somethings who are in colleges now, and they are the teachers, and they're teaching those things to little kids and to teenagers in elementary schools and high schools. And when I'm flooded with hope at the new generation, and it's because of the work of the residential schools survivors taking like a 25-year-long fight with Canada, and asking for an apology, never getting one. And finally, you know, when people said, oh, Canada apologized, wasn't that great of us? And we have these truth and reconciliation, you know, things. Wasn't that great of us to do for Native people? But it wasn't, Canada did not do that willingly. Canada had to do that because they lost the court case. They refused to apologize because an apology insinuates liability. So they wouldn't do it until the Supreme Court of Canada said the residential schools were wrong. Then they were forced, and the TRCs weren't Canada's idea. It was the truth and it was the residential school survivors who could have said, you know, thanks, we knew they were wrong, take the money, let's get out of here. They didn't. They said, as a part of our settlement, we want Canada to have Truth and Reconciliation Commission and events just based on South Africa so that Canada can know the truth. That's why I use the term reconciliation, because our elders mandated it. Our residential school survivors asked for truth and reconciliation. They didn't just ask for truth. So that's why I feel like, okay, that's my mandate too. That's my job. I have to walk alongside of Canada because of that. So yeah, I have a lot of hope though. Young people are so amazing. Yeah, it's a different conversation.
Yeah. There's a really good question there. I don't know. I don't think we got to this one. It's Charlene. Do you see that one? I work in an Indigenous community in which the only community church has a perspective that everything associated with traditional ceremonies is evil. I don't attend in a large part because I'm uncomfortable with being associated with that view. However, it still feels somewhat patronizing to not attend church with the Indigenous believers here because I think I know better than them. Once again, curious to hear your thoughts.
Go ahead, Johnny, you had some words for that? Let me think about it.
I'm sure I can come up with something. You know, if we have that relationship with Christ, whether we're native or non-native, we should be able to worship wherever we go. And sometimes where we go is not necessarily the place where we are all in agreement. Sometimes we are put there as somebody to help to bring the light to others, to bring understanding to others. And so I would say that my thought is that if we don't go to the places that need to have a better understanding, then how are they ever going to get a better understanding? So sometimes you have to push through the muck and the mire in order to get to the fudgesicles in the freezer. In order to get there, we have to walk it out. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I know you've been doing it a long time, Cheryl. And the stuff that we've had to go through in order to do it has made us, it's given us the ability to be able to sit here and try and answer questions, because I believe that it's important that we go to both places and we learn how to become the bridge. If you really feel that way, that you think you know better than them, but you don't like being with the other guys, then fact is, you've got to be a bridge to help and you got to keep your own opinion open. Sometimes our opinions put us in bondage because we get caught in opinions, and if we're not willing to, I heard my pastor say on Sunday that it was opinions that stop people from being able to walk together, because they won't lay their opinions down and be humble. And sometimes, if you may still have the opinion, you may set it aside so that you can be part of the relationship. And in that relationship, your opinion may change. But we have to be willing to listen to both sides and be able to be that bridge that can bring them together.
Mm-hmm. I used to always find myself sort of defending what was called the contextual movement, the use of drums and stuff and artwork and regalia in church and ceremony. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting to constantly be talking to non-indigenous people and trying to explain why it's okay for me to be this kind of a Christian when and I just and it's something that no other Christians really have to do. Like, you don't have Irish Christians, who struggle with being Irish and a Christian at the same time. Like, it's a very native thing. It's a very North American thing. And it's systemic racism. And it's something that is, it goes way back to that eradication. And so if we could just be made into good Christians, into good citizens, and we could just be less Indian, then we could be, then we're okay. And that's the whole program of to me, of colonization, and that it's in the church and that they're using God's name for that is daunting. It's not the truth. It is not the gospel. That is, it's eradication. It's a form of genocide. So one of the things that I talk about in this context is the Great Reformation. So Martin Luther and Zwingli, John Knox, all of these guys in Europe, of course, the Catholic Church was going through this. They had a lot of power, all the power. The priests knew Latin, so the Bible was in Latin. So the priests had all the power, and they could just. And I think Martin Luther kind of lost his his mind a bit, and he heard us saying, "When a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs," and it made him angry because people were having to pay, and the church was extorting people with all of its power. So Martin Luther had what is called now the Great Reformation, but I think we should call it the Great Contextualization, because what he did. Yeah. Was he took the gospel back. He put it in the common vernacular of the German people. He wrote it in German, he was being hunted and he was going to be executed for writing the Bible in German. Today we were like, yeah, let's, we have Wycliffe translating into hopefully every language in the world. We have no concept of what that means. but he had to wrestle the gospel for his people. He took songs from the pubs that everybody knew that jingle, and he wrote Christian lyrics onto it. And nobody freaks out about those old, you'll sing those songs and everybody knows those songs and they sing along with gusto, but those came from the pubs. So his great contextualization, and of course, this happened in England as well. This happened in Scotland. This happened in Czechoslovakia, in Switzerland, all of these places. And then when the gospel was brought to, their gospel was brought to North America, or to the Americas, I guess, we could say, they just thought they had it so figured out that they didn't realize that what they had to do with the Catholics. Now we are going to have to do that with their gospel, to try to find the real gospel that was planted actually in indigenous soil, that grows up indigenously in this land. And how does it look? And how different did Martin Luther's gospel look from the gospel of Rome? And how different will the gospel look here in Canada, in Kitiban Zibi? How different will that look from the gospel, from Europe? So these are really, really big questions. They're really good questions, and my answer is just decolonize the hell out of that. Like literally, it's hellish what has happened to our Bible, and in some ways, we were given a slave version of the Bible. Nobody says, "Oh, Jesus' first cousin, John the Baptist." First cousin is like your brother to us. That's like saying my brother was executed. Nobody says Jesus' brother was executed by a dominant culture that wanted to eradicate his people. Nobody says that stuff, because that's, again, freedom and justice, and those are dangerous. Those things will set us free. The gospel has the power to set us truly free as Indigenous people, as Jonathan, your dear Papa Andrew said, make you the best Mohawk you can be, yeah. Okay. Sermon over.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. I get a little fired up about this because to me, it's freedom. It's some of the stuff that has set me free. And I think it has the power to set our Indigenous people free, to really feel who they are. As an Indigenous person, loved by God, loved by Creator, and seen by Creator. This is powerful stuff, and it's something that hasn't always happened in Canada. We've been talking about being at this for years and years, but we haven't seen it on a big scale all across Canada. We still have that same old stuff that you're talking about, where there's churches that are judging Native people. That's the sort of common story. The common story is not, I found all this freedom and I believe Jesus speaks my language. So we got a lot of work to do.
Cheryl, you do a really good job. You're pretty smart.
Thank you, my dear bro. You're one of my favorite mentors. And I've learned so much from you in my life because you are so, so much older than me.
Oh, I had to know that was coming around to something like that. I'm sitting there like soaking it all, and then the arrow goes in. So to me, like, this is like been very, very informative. You've done a really good job, and the words that you've spoken have brought refreshment, I believe, to many people. And I hope it's caused people all across the land that have listened to want to come back and be a part of this, because each week there's going to be people even smarter than Cheryl. No, I'm kidding. There's going to be more people that are going to be sharing, and it's going to be deep. It's going to be awesome. And I just want to extend thanks to Kanata Baptist Church and Jim and the different people that have really, really worked so hard. Non-Native people who are giving us as First Nations people, Sarah and Cheryl and I, we're the three that you've been watching the whole time. But they have given us a platform to be able to share this, because they see it as a way to bring Canada to a place where we can begin to walk together. So vital, so important.
I also want to thank you, Cheryl, for your presentation. So much, it's so rich. I'm really grateful. And I want to thank the audience for all of the awesome questions and engagement that they've obviously taken a lot from the presentation as well. I just quickly wanted to speak about next week's presentation. Next week we have Alan Corbier coming from, or going to be sharing. Alan is an Ojibwe scholar from Chiging. He is a historian and a professor from York University. With his story, he didn't really start out as trying to be a professor of history. He actually just started out as a young Ojibwe from Manitoula Island who wanted to learn his own language and explore his own history. He went deeper, and in the end, he uncovered an important part of not only his story, but our shared story, which is Canada's story. A story that was never taught to us in school, a story that had been purposely buried. And one of the questions revealing is, did you know that Canada had his own Magna Carta? We didn't learn this stuff. And when we had started out on our shared journey together, we began walking together well. And when you hear Alan speak, I think you'll agree that the story of our shared beginnings is a good one. Jonathan and I will also be here next week, along with Alan, at the same time, 7 o'clock, Wednesday, October 28th. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jonathan. Would you close us with a song?
Sure. This is a song it's called These Ways, and it was written some time ago. Chris Delarenzi and I wrote this song, beautiful song, and I believe it really fits well with what we're doing about the land and our place and how First Nations people grow up to be thankful. I feel the warmth touch my face. It's a new day. Looking to the east, it's good to give thanks. And it always goes much better when I remember these ways. I feel my strength returning to keep the pace. I'm traveling on this broken road, and I sing, your way, are you way, your way, oh, are you way, your way, your way. Your way, are you way, your way, oh, are you way, your way. I'm remembering songs from yesterday. I can feel the rain on my face. Into the circle, I find my place. Dancing to the prayers on way home. Traveling on this broken road, and I sing, your way, are you way, your way, oh, are you way, your way, your way.
Yo ho, yo ho, yo ho.
Thank you. Now we go.